It is Karsch and Anderson here on 97.1. Great to be with you on a Friday. Sun's out and shining. Look, all week long, the Birch Kid down in Indianapolis for the NFL Draft Combine, and he joins us for the final time this week. Birchie, how are you?
I'm doing great, fellas. I'm back in the D, but I had a fantastic 3 days down there in Indy.
Yeah, so how long did it take you to get out of the building last night? Watching your video this morning, you said, I'm going to try and get out of this maze because the Indiana Convention Center is something else.
Yeah, it's pretty much a vortex. Like, once it sucks you in, it's really difficult to make your way out. There's sky bridges that just lead to more sky bridges, and escalators that lead to more escalators, and hallways that lead to nowhere, and a bunch of empty rooms. But I did find my way out eventually, and I was pretty proud of myself for that. I feel like I should get high marks for, like, situational awareness, being able to exit that building.
I kind of remember that when we were there for the Super Bowl, and, you know, it's wintertime, obviously, and we're going, well, the same, almost just a few weeks after you're there. But it seemed like you go from one building to the next without knowing you're in another building.
Yeah, it's incredible. Then all of a sudden you look up and you're inside St. Elmo's. Like, how did I even get here? This is amazing. I've got a shrimp cocktail in front of me.
Nice.
Okay, we gave you an assignment. Now that you've seen a lot, heard a lot, who do you love the most at 17 in the first round, at 18 in the second round, and at 18 in the fourth round?
Okay, so I don't know if I'm allowed to take this route in this exercise, but what I love the most for the Lions at 17 is to trade down. But before we get to that, let's say they do stay at 17. I think with Taylor Decker's return, the fact that he's penciled in at left tackle in 2026, they could afford to take a swing on a developmental tackle with huge upside like Caden Proctor. I think besides maybe those first two guys in the draft, maybe even including them in Maui Goa and Fano, Proctor might be the highest ceiling tackle in the draft. And if he's there at 17 and you really believe in him, you know, knowing that he could learn under Decker's wing for a year, maybe two, I think that would be a worthwhile investment. But I think it would behoove them even more to consider a trade back in the first round for someone like tackle Monroe Freeling. Now, Monroe Freeling from Georgia is a player who was described just a few days ago by Daniel Jeremiah as, quote, Dan Campbell. He's just a very Dan Campbell-like player. And the story goes last season, he was suffering from like a pretty extreme high ankle sprain that was supposed to sideline him for like 3 to 4 weeks. And that very week, Georgia had a pretty key game against, I believe, Auburn. And their offensive line coach went to Freeling and said, hey, just in an emergency, could we rely on you in this game if we absolutely had to for like 4 or 5 snaps? And Freeling said, absolutely, coach, no problem. Well, he ended up playing every single snap of the game, like 65, 70 snaps, and just has the toughness and the technique that I think would lead to a long, stable career. So I say the trade back to me makes so much sense because I don't think the Lions can afford to go from picking 50th and then waiting almost 75 picks to select again at 118, especially with what feels like a couple pressing needs on defense. So I'll say they make the trade back in the first round and pick up either an extra second or an extra third.
Yeah, I like where your head's at, too, because I too, don't want them to miss out on the entire third round of the NFL draft. It just seems it's a wasted opportunity, but it's something that they dealt with last year when they traded up for Tesla. But you mentioned Freeling, you mentioned Caden Proctor. A guy I like at offensive tackle is the big fella from Arizona State, Max Ian Ancher. Have you seen him? Is there anything that stands out to you about him?
Yeah, so unfortunately, the offensive tackles or offensive linemen aren't testing and aren't speaking to the media until tomorrow. So I didn't get a chance to kind of get to know any of these guys. But what I do know about Ahini Archer is that he does feel like a bit of a project, maybe even more than someone like Proctor, who didn't begin playing football until like late in high school. And he only has one season of exposure to Power 5 competition. Now, he performed really well last year, exceptionally well for a player of his background at Arizona State. But you ask around, you read about him, and that's a guy that I think most people agree will need a season or two before he's ready to step in. Now, again, you could probably afford to do that with Decker back now, and there's huge upside there too. But I think you'd have to be willing to wait on him.
Okay, second round, and let's go ahead and give you a third round pick too, since you traded back. Who are the perfect candidates for a second round and a third round pick for the Lions that you saw?
So I'm going to go back to a couple guys that I've been banging the drum for with you guys this week. And in the second round, I'm going to take the Oklahoma edge rusher, R. Mason Thomas, who, again, might be a little undersized for that position at 6'2", might not fit with the Lions that typically valued there. They're probably more keen on a guy like Keldrick Falk in the first round with his 6'7" frame. But I'm telling you, man, this front seven needs more speed, needs more explosiveness, and I think R. Mason Thomas would bring it. I love the fact that, a player that he compares himself to, that he strives to be like in the NFL is Nick Bonito, who was another undersized edge rusher out of Oklahoma who went in the second round, I think 4 years ago. Now, over the last 2 years, leads the NFL, or second in the NFL in sacks. And look, he just has violence to him, R. Mason Thomas. He has speed to him. And I love this quote. He said, when you get a sack, why not get a sack again? he would bring the burst opposite Hutchinson that I think this defense is really lacking.
Defensive tackle. The Lions went out and they got Tyleik Williams last year. They're going to lose DJ Reader. They've had some instability on the interior of the defensive line. Yet it also seems like a position that they might feel like they're okay at. Are they okay at defensive tackle, or is this something that we should keep an eye on for maybe later in the draft?
I think they feel pretty good at defensive tackle. I expect them to bring back Roy Lopez. I do think Reader departs, but with a healthy Aleem and a second year Tyleik Williams, they seem to have some good talent and good depth there. And I still think they have some hopes for Levi Onwuzurike. And I say that carefully. I know people probably roll their eyes as I bring his name up, but that's another body you're plugging back into the defense who did play really, really well in 2024. So I don't think that feels like a pressing need.
Final thing here as we project, who's the perfect third rounder? Now that you have an extra third rounder after you traded back, who do you like that could fall into that range for the Lions?
Yeah, so I was going back and forth in my head on, maybe more of a traditional safety like Bud Clark, who I really enjoyed getting to know yesterday. He said his mama raised a born killer, and he plays like it. And then Kyle Lewis, another player that I mentioned to you guys, that sort of safety, linebacker, nickel hybrid out of Pittsburgh. And I'm going to go with Kyle Lewis. And it stems from something we heard Kelvin Shepard say this week. He was sort of pressed on his defensive scheme this week and how they played so much base defense this year, far more than any team in the NFL, and that they played almost no nickel defense this year, and that the Seahawks, who won the Super Bowl, played a ton of nickel. And Shep's retort to all of that was, well, yeah, you know who Seattle's nickel is? It's that freak from South Carolina, Nick Emenwari. And he said, I probably would have played nickel if I had him. Well, enter Kyle Lewis, who considers Nick Emenwari one of his models. That's a player that he strives to emulate, that he wants to be like in the NFL. And he brings a lot of the same talent and tools to the table. And look, I know that the length might not be there like it is for Emenwari, but Kyle Lewis has the versatility to just cause problems for a defensive front. And again, he would add speed to this defense. Like, I know the sack numbers looked pretty strong for the Lions last year, but that was a slow front seven by the end of the year. They were one of the slowest defenses in the league in terms of time to quarterback pressure, in terms of time for the opposing quarterback to throw. And I think Kyle Lewis is a guy who could help solve that. And I like what he said, too. He said, look, people say I'm undersized for a linebacker. I'm here to showcase you. You don't got to be 240 to make plays, and you don't got to be 240 to hit stick. So I think that's, you could add between Kyle Lewis and R. Mason Thomas, you'd be adding a lot of burst to this front seven.
Now that you're home for the weekend, who's the player that you're most excited to see perform at the Combine for the rest of the weekend?
So, he performed yesterday, and I was remiss not to mention him when talking to you guys. But, Gator, you mentioned defensive tackles, which jogged my memory. One guy that I really enjoyed talking to this week was Dom Orange, who is this big, bruising, hulking defensive tackle from Iowa State. And I love him most because he has the nickname Big Citrus. I mean, like, come on. Like, nothing better than Big Citrus. And he also says his spirit animal is the hammerhead shark, the way he's just constantly hunting down the ball. So I know he tested yesterday. I haven't had a chance to look at his numbers, but that's the guy that I'll be paying close attention to next season for sure.
Burchie, great job this week as always. Appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll see you on Twitter with your videos and read your stuff on 971theticket.com.
Thanks a lot, fellas. Appreciate it.
There he is, the Burchie kid who's been at the Combine all week long. And how about that draft? Get Monroe Freeling in a trade back, the tackle from Georgia. Come back with R. Mason Thomas, the edge rusher out of Oklahoma, in the second round. And now with an extra third-round pick, get Kyle Lewis, the hybrid linebacker safety out of Pitt. I think people would like that draft.
Yeah, there's a lot too. Like, I like the Kyle Lewis pick probably best of all. I don't mind Monroe Freeling either. The one in between, not so sure about.
248-539-9797. We'll get to your phone calls and feedback. If you want to react to that, anything else on your mind, fair game. It's Karsch and Anderson here on 97.1.